Welcome. This time, we'll explore what peasants across the medieval world found on their tables. From dark bread and thin broth to strange local staples, survival often tasted of necessity more than choice. Let's take a look. If you were a peasant in medieval Japan, you wouldn't waste fresh fish on yourself. That was for the market, or for the rare days when the Lord's table needed filling. What you kept for your own family often looked, and smelled, nothing like the glittering catch you pulled from the river. Here, in the shadow of the temple wall, there's a jar. A squat clay thing, blackened by age and thumb-marked from decades of use. Inside, under a seal of cloth and ash, is what will keep you through the leanest months, fish so transformed you can no longer tell they were fish at all. They've been packed in layers of salt and rice, left to soften, collapse, and melt into a dark paste. You don't stir it. You don't prod it. Time and fermentation do their own quiet work. Open the jar, and the air turns dense, a sharp, salty hit that makes your mouth water and your stomach tighten at the same time. You take only a spoonful. That's all you can spare. The salt is too strong to eat more anyway. Drop it onto a bowl of plain rice, and it seeps outward like ink into paper, staining each grain until there's no white left. The first bite jolts you, salt so sharp it bites the tip of your tongue, then a deep, savory weight that seems older than you are. For the poor, this isn't delicacy, it's preservation. The salt lets you keep the jar for months, even through heat. You eat it slowly, each grain of rice a carrier for the richness of what was once fresh. You chew with care, because this spoonful has to last until nightfall. The magistrate's household wouldn't touch it like this. There, the fish comes to the table clean, bright, and hot from the fire, grilled with cedar, steamed with ginger, glazed with soy. The smell is light, the flesh tender, the kind of meal that disappears in minutes and leaves nothing behind. But for you, this jar is your wealth. It feeds the body, and, in a way, the spirit, because it means you won't go hungry tomorrow. By the time the bowl is empty, the flavor lingers on your lips, in your teeth, in the back of your throat. You rinse with weak tea, but it stays. The smell clings to your hands and your clothes, and even in the temple courtyard, where incense burns in steady curls, you still catch it in the air. You put the jar back in the shade and tie the cloth tight again. The weight of it is a comfort. It means you've got something left. And far to the north, where the winters bite harder and the fields yield little, there's another trick to stretching hunger thin, one that starts not with fish or rice, but with the bark of a tree. If you were a peasant in the far north, you'd measure the year by your harvest. And this year, the rye has failed again. Not a little, not just the thin patches near the edges of the field, but all of it. The stalks rose weak, pale, and bent in the wind. By the time the sickles came out, there was almost nothing to gather. But hunger doesn't wait for better seasons. When the grain is gone, the forest becomes your pantry. The older folk know where to go, which trees to choose. Not the outer bark, that's bitter enough to burn the tongue, but the soft inner layer that hides beneath. It peels away in wide curls, pale as unwashed wool and damp with sap. The scent is sharp, resinous, the same smell that drifts from the hearth when kindling catches. You dry it first, over the stove or in the low sun. It hardens into brittle strips, curling at the edges like paper left too close to the fire. Then the grinding begins, slow, heavy work. The millstone doesn't care that this isn't rye. It crushes the bark into a coarse powder, still fibrous, the color of old parchment. There's flour left, but not much. You mix the two together, bark for bulk, flour for binding. The dough that forms is dark, stiff, reluctant to rise. In the oven, it hardens into a loaf you can barely press a thumb into. Cutting it takes a firm hand. The slices fall thick, uneven, the crumb dense and flecked with woody strands. The first bite is work for the jaw. There's a bitterness that sits at the back of the tongue, chased by a faint sweetness from the sap. It isn't bread you savor. It's bread you endure. In the chieftain's hall, this would be unthinkable. His bread is white, soft, sweet with honey. The butter that spreads across it leaves no room for splinters in the teeth. Pine bark in his world is for kindling, not for eating. But your world has no such luxury. You chew slowly, washing it down with weak ale. It sits heavy in the gut, quieting hunger if not comforting it. The children wrinkle their noses, but they eat. There's no other choice. In a few days this loaf will be gone, and the forest will call again. You set aside the last slice for tomorrow, wrapping it in cloth to keep it from the damp. Outside, snow thickens on the eaves. In this cold, the bark bread will keep for weeks, but the truth is, it never lasts that long. Hunger makes sure of it. And far from here, where the night itself lasts for months, there's a different way to keep the body alive, not in bitterness, but in a gleam of warm, unctuous fat passed from hand to hand in the dark. If you lived this far north, you'd forget what a field even looked like. There is no wheat to grind, no rye to harvest, no bread to break in the mornings. The land is locked in white for most of the year, and the only green you see is the pale moss clinging to stone. Here life clings to the ice the way you do, with patience, and with fat. Seal fat is not a garnish, not a delicacy. It is survival in its purest form. When a seal is caught, the meat is welcome, but the fat is what will see you through the months when the sun does not rise. It is thick, pale, almost translucent when fresh, and it carries the warmth of the animal's own life. Cut into slabs, it yields under the knife like cold butter. Tonight, under the ice moon, the family gathers in a low, snow-walled shelter. The air smells of oil lamps and the faint, sweet tang of the sea carried in on the fur-lined hoods. The fat is passed around in a wooden bowl, still warm from the hands that trimmed it. You take a piece between your fingers and feel it soften instantly. It glistens in the lamplight, coating your skin before it ever reaches your mouth. The first bite is a slow push against your teeth, then a collapse into warmth. It spreads across the tongue, heavy and rich, leaving no room for hunger. There is no salt, no spice, no herb to soften it. Only the clean, strong taste of the sea and the life it gave. A few mouthfuls are enough to carry you through hours of cold. The children's lips shine with it, their cheeks flushed from the heat of the lamps. An elder wipes her hands on her sealskin trousers, the fabric already polished by years of the same gesture. In this place, you measure wealth not in coins or grain but in the weight of the fat you can store. Hung in sealskin bags, it will keep for months, hardening in the cold until needed again. A noble in the warm south might turn away at the sight, his table set with delicate game birds and fragrant stews. But here, he would not last a week without this bowl. Bread and meat would freeze solid before they could be eaten. Only fat holds its purpose in the cold, to keep the body burning from the inside out. You lean back, wiping your mouth with the back of your hand. The fat lingers in the throat, a quiet reassurance against the wind's howl outside. Tomorrow, the men will hunt again, and the women will tend the lamps, and the children will chase each other in boots that crunch on snow older than they are. Far from here, in a land where the air burns dry instead of freezing, another humble meal waits over an open flame, one that leaps and snaps with every bite. Grasshoppers tossed in a skillet until their shells crack like kindling. If you travel far south, where winters don't freeze but scorch, survival has a different sound. Here, the air hums with life, not from crops or herds, but from the clouds of insects that rise from the fields when you walk through them. And when the grain harvest is thin, or when the Lord's men take their share first, those clouds become your pantry. Grasshoppers are not gathered one by one. Children run ahead with woven baskets, driving the insects toward low nets strung between sticks. By sunset, the baskets are heavy, the creatures inside snapping and scratching against each other. They're shaken into a wide, shallow pan, the kind blackened from years over the same fire. The cooking is quick. A handful of coarse salt, a splash of oil if there is any, and the grasshoppers leap one last time as the heat reaches them. Their shells crack open with a sound like kindling snapping underfoot. A nutty smell rises, rich, earthy, almost like roasting almonds. The legs curl tight, the wings grow brittle and flake away at the touch. Eaten hot, they surprise the tongue, sharp at first, then deep and savory, like meat without the heaviness. A family can eat well this way with nothing more than a pan, a fire, and what the fields provide. The poorest might eat them plain, straight from the pan, fingers oily, lips salted. Those with a little more might crush dried chilies over them, turning each bite into fire. It is a food of the commons, but also, in its own way, of kings. In some courts, especially in the far reaches of desert kingdoms, the same grasshoppers would be glazed with honey and served in silver bowls. The insect itself is humble. What changes is the hand that seasons it. When the pan is empty, the shells left behind are swept into the ashes. The night smells faintly of the feast just eaten. Tomorrow, the fields will hum again, and the hunt will start over. And if you followed the line of trade caravans eastward from here, past the markets and the sun-bleached roads, you'd find another meal that clings to survival, not in the heat of a skillet, but in the slow, curling smoke of a hut where millet simmers for hours. The first thing that strikes you is the smoke. It doesn't drift lazily the way it does from a hearth in a cold country. Here, in the heat, it clings, dense and sharp, to the air, the skin, the back of your throat. Step inside, and it wraps around you like a rough blanket, seeping into your hair, your clothes, even the lines of your hands. Somewhere in the center of this haze, a pot hangs over a low fire, its iron belly blackened to a dull sheen by years of cooking the same, single thing, millet. Millet is the grain that survives when others surrender. It grows on tired soil where wheat would wither, and where rice would drown. The people here do not speak of it with affection, but with respect. It is the reason they stand upright after the harvest fails, the reason children wake with something to chew. And so, it has been here, in this same pot, for generations, boiled in water carried in clay jars from a distance you feel in your knees. The porridge thickens slowly. It begins as a pale, watery swirl, each grain floating apart, until the heat draws them together into a heavy mass. You watch as the cook, an older woman with wrists thin as twigs, stirs with a wooden paddle longer than her arm. Each turn releases more steam, more of that smell, part grass, part warm dust, part bitter ash from the fire. There are no herbs, no meat, no milk. Only what the field and the fire can give. When served, it arrives in shallow wooden bowls, the surface rippling from the last stir. It sticks to the sides like plaster, and it cools quickly in the dry air. Eating it is not a pleasure. It is work. The grains cling to the roof of your mouth, stubborn against your tongue. Still, each spoonful settles heavily in the stomach, quieting hunger for hours. For the poorest families, millet is the whole day's diet. Morning, noon, and night, it's the same pale porridge, perhaps thinned with more water as the week wears on. Those with a little more might stir in goat's milk to soften it, or honey saved for special days. In the chief's home, millet could appear alongside roasted goat or spiced greens, soaking up the juices until it becomes something worth savoring. But here, the bowls are bare. When the eating is done, there are no scraps. Bowls are scraped clean with the blunt edge of the spoon, and fingers chase the last sticky grains. The pot remains in its place, suspended above the coals, ready to receive the next measure of millet before dawn. Outside, the heat hangs heavy, but the wind carries whispers of faraway rain, rain that, if it comes, might mean more generous harvests next season. And in another place, far from this haze and heat, the air smells of wet stone and sea salt, where a cottage kitchen waits with dark bread so hard it must be drowned in weak ale, and onions boiled down to their bitter ends. The wind off the Atlantic doesn't just rattle the shutters, it seeps into the walls, into your bones. The air inside this stone cottage is no warmer than the fog outside, but it holds a smell that's sharper: old bread and boiled onions. On the table sits a loaf so dark it's almost black, the crust cracked like dried earth. This is rye bread baked weeks ago, meant to last, and it has, but only in the way a stone lasts. You could chip a tooth if you tried it plain. To make it edible, it's dropped into a wooden bowl and drowned in ale that's more water than beer. The bread softens slowly, each gulp of liquid loosening the dense crumb until it can be broken apart with a spoon. What rises from the bowl is not the sweet, warm smell of fresh bread, but something sour, almost metallic, the scent of grain that has outlived its welcome. Beside it, in a pot hanging over the hearth, onion skins swirl in a cloudy broth. These are not the onions themselves. Those would be too valuable to eat without a feast to justify them. But the papery layers peeled away and saved in a cloth sack until there are enough to flavor water. The result is thin and biting, the sweetness long gone, leaving only the memory of it. The broth warms the mouth for a moment, then disappears, leaving the belly as empty as before. For the wealthier families in the port towns, rye bread might still be baked soft and served with fresh butter, and onions would be stewed in cream or baked whole alongside fish. But in cottages like this, bread and skins are not the shadow of a better meal, they are the meal. The workday does not end with eating. After the bowls are scraped clean, the bread loaf is wrapped in cloth again, returned to its corner, as if it might soften in the dark. Tomorrow, more ale will be poured over it, and the same ritual will repeat. Hunger isn't sated here, it's kept at bay, the way you'd hold a door against a cold wind. And farther inland, away from the salted air and the bitter onion steam, winter grips the fields so tightly that the only crop left in the frozen ground is a pale, stubborn root, one that must carry the village through until spring dares to arrive. By the time winter settles its weight across the land, the fields are nothing but frozen mud and memory. The wheat is long gone, the barley ground to dust in the mill, the peas eaten before the first frost. What remains are turnips, not the tender young ones of summer, but hard, knotted bulbs with skins the color of old bone. They sit half buried in the frostbitten earth, their green tops wilted and blackened, waiting for hands desperate enough to dig them out. The work begins with the sound of iron striking frozen soil. Each blow is followed by a grunt, a pause, the crack of roots breaking free. Your fingers stiffen almost instantly, but the turnips must be pulled before the ground freezes solid all the way down. Piled into baskets, they give off a faint, earthy smell, damp, cold, and faintly bitter, like the air in a root cellar. In the cottage, they are peeled with care, the skins curling away to reveal pale flesh streaked with yellow. Raw, they are sharp on the tongue, almost peppery, and they fill the mouth with a watery crunch. Boiled, they soften into something bland, the bitterness muted but still lurking. Roasted near the hearth, they pick up a hint of sweetness, though never enough to disguise what they are. For weeks, and sometimes months, turnips become the backbone of every meal. Sliced thin and fried in the last of the lard, mashed into coarse bread dough, floated in thin broth made from nothing more than water and a pinch of salt, they appear in every possible form until the mind forgets there was ever any other flavor. Children groan at the sight of them, but they still eat, because there is nothing else. In the manners, things are different. Turnips might still be served, but alongside mutton, butter, and spice sauces, a humble root dressed in luxury, more ornament than necessity. For peasants, there is no such disguise. The turnip is both the beginning and the end of the meal. And when the last of them are gone, when even the smallest roots have been dug up and boiled into mush, the hunger turns toward whatever else the land can offer. Sometimes that means meat, but not the kind you'd expect. In the desert winds far from here, it means meat dried so hard by the sun it takes an hour to chew. If you were to leave behind the frost-cracked turnip fields and follow the trade routes far to the south, the air would change long before the land did. The damp chill would give way to a heat that never loosens its grip, a heat that bleaches the bones of animals and leaves the sky a pale, cloudless white. Here, in the sweep of the desert, nothing rots quickly, not even flesh. That is why meat, once carved, can hang for weeks without fear of the flies doing their work. Between two acacia trees, their shadows spindly and trembling in the hot wind, ropes are strung with thin strips of camel meat. Fresh, it would be soft and dark, heavy with the rich smell of blood and fat. Out here, it changes. Days of sun draw out the moisture until the meat turns almost black, its surface rough and ridged. The wind adds its own seasoning, a faint tang of dust, a bitterness that clings to the tongue. By the time it is ready, the strips are hard as horn. To eat them is not a matter of biting so much as wearing them down. You take a piece between your teeth and chew until the fibers loosen, until the salt and fat hidden deep inside begin to release their faint reward. There is no hurry. The work of eating is slow, and that is part of the point. The longer it lasts in your mouth, the longer it stays in your belly. For the poorest herders, dried camel meat might be the only meat they see for months. It travels well, tied in a cloth sack, slung over a saddle, and can be eaten without fire or pot. Families break off pieces in the cool hours before dawn or during the endless glare of midday, each strip shared carefully so that it lasts until the next animal can be slaughtered. In wealthier tents, the same meat may be softened in boiling water, cooked with rice or spices brought by caravan from far-off coasts. It becomes stew then, fragrant, heavy, and unrecognizable from the leathery ration eaten on the open sands. The difference between the two is not just taste, but life itself. For one, it is survival, for the other, abundance. When the last strip is gone, the rope between the acacias sways empty in the wind, and the eye turns toward the horizon, scanning for the caravan or the hunt that will fill it again. In the meantime, hunger waits quietly, never gone, only delayed. And far from this endless sun, in a village where nights fall early and candles are too dear to burn for long, a single clay bowl steams on a bare wooden table, its contents no richer than lentils boiled in plain water, a small comfort against the dark. The wind outside claws at the shutters, the kind of cold that makes wood creak and men keep their hands in their sleeves. Inside, the cottage is dim. A single tallow candle burns low on the table, the wick bending toward its own melted wax. The light it throws is soft but small, just enough to find the bowl in front of you. It's lentils tonight. Small, brown, and humble, they don't shine the way beans do, and they have no fragrance to call the family in from the yard. They are boiled in water pulled from the well, stirred with the blunt end of a wooden spoon until they soften enough to crush against the roof of your mouth. There is no salt tonight. The last pinch went into yesterday's meal. No herbs either. They are buried deep under snow in the garden. The steam that curls up from the clay bowl is the only warmth in the room. The walls, made of wattle and daub, do not hold the heat of the fire for long. Every so often, a gust of wind finds its way under the door, and the candle trembles, its shadow swaying over the rough-hewn boards. You scoop the lentils with a wooden spoon, the bowl heavy in your hands. They are bland, earthy, with the faint taste of the smoke from the fire that cooked them. In better times, there might be bread beside the bowl, dense rye to soak up the broth, maybe even a wedge of cheese if the cow had been milked well. But tonight, there is only the lentils. The broth is thin, more water than meal, yet it fills the belly enough to work another day. For the wealthy, lentils were something different. In the manors, they might be cooked in rich stock, laced with saffron or pepper brought by merchants from far-off ports, served in glazed bowls alongside roasted meats. Here they are not a choice, they are what is left when choices are gone. The meal is eaten slowly, not out of savoring but out of necessity. When the spoon scrapes the bottom of the bowl, the candle is almost gone, its light reduced to a trembling ember. The flame dies as the last mouthful is swallowed, leaving the room in darkness and the body in the same thin warmth it began with. And along the river banks far away, where fish are pulled in nets glistening with silver in the moonlight, there's another kind of supper, one that cannot be saved for later, no matter how much you might wish it could. Follow the road down from the high fields, past the empty plots and the frost-stiffened hedges, and you'll hear it before you see it, the slow push and pull of the river. It is wide here, and dark, carrying both silt and the faint smell of weeds. Along its banks, huts squat low to the ground, their roofs sagging under thatch dampened by mist. Inside one of them, the day's work waits in a wicker basket, 3 small fish, still slick from the net. There is no salt in this place. What little comes upriver is claimed by the lord or sold in the market for a price too high for hands that spend their days hauling nets. Without salt, fish must be eaten the same day it is caught, before its sweetness fades into the sour smell of rot. So the fire is built as soon as the fish arrive, the kindling lit with a twist of dry grass. The fish are split open on a rough plank, their bellies cleaned with a dull knife. Scales cling to the wood, shining like pale coins in the dim light. The flesh is pale and soft, the bones small and sharp. In the pot above the fire, water simmers, not enough to boil them fully, just enough to warm the meat until it begins to flake away from the spine. The smell is gentle, almost sweet, carrying none of the sharp brine you'd find in fish cured for travel. Eating it is a quiet thing. Each mouthful is tender, warm for only a moment before cooling on the tongue. There is no bread to eat alongside it, no ale to wash it down. You pull the bones free with your fingers, laying them in a neat pile on the edge of the board. The meal will be gone quickly, and its memory will be gone sooner. For the wealthier along the coast, fish was a dish of choice, not necessity. Their catches were layered in salt as soon as they left the nets, packed into barrels that could last for months. By the time it reached their tables, the meat had absorbed the salt until it was dense and savory, served with butter, herbs, and the company of wine. The river people have no such luxuries. Here, the fish is as fleeting as the day that brought it. When the last bite is eaten, the fire is allowed to die. The bones are carried outside, tossed into the shallows where the current will take them. Tomorrow may bring another catch, or it may not. If the nets come up empty, there will be only grain to boil or roots to scrape from the earth. And farther inland, where the soil is thin and the rains have been mean, hunger takes on another shape. A pot of barley gruel so watery it can barely be called food, yet it is all there is to carry a body into the next day. If you leave the riverside and walk inland, past the last of the damp fields and the bare-limbed orchards, the land begins to change. The grass thins. The soil shows itself, pale, stony, and stingy with life. Villages here are smaller, houses lower to the ground, as though trying to hide from the wind. There are no bustling markets, no fishing boats rocking in the current. What fills the bowls here comes from the earth alone, and when the earth gives little, the bowls are light. On the hearth in one such house, a pot leans over the fire, its rim blackened from years of use. Inside, barley swells slowly in water. There is more water than grain, because the sack in the corner is almost empty and must last a week. The liquid clouds as the grain releases its starch, and a thin skin forms on the surface. A wooden spoon is drawn across it to skim away the husks that float up like pale petals. The smell is faint, a whisper of grass, a hint of smoke from the fire. The texture is somewhere between broth and porridge, too thin to fill the mouth, too thick to drink without chewing. It is not meant for pleasure. It is meant to keep the legs from shaking when the work is long and the hours are cold. When poured into a bowl, the steam rises quickly and disappears into the air, leaving the surface dull and still. You eat it in careful sips, not because it is hot, but because finishing too soon would only remind you how little there is. A handful of salt, a drop of animal fat, even a scrap of onion skin would change it entirely. But today, none of those can be spared. The richer towns, even in lean years, rarely taste gruel like this. For them, barley is baked into dense loaves or brewed into ale, sweetened and spiced, served with butter and cheese. Here, there is no transformation. The grain is as it comes, boiled until it loses its shape, swallowed because it must be. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, carrying the smell of smoke from another house. Someone there has managed better, a smell of meat, faint but unmistakable. It sharpens the hunger, but there is nothing to be done. You finish the last mouthful, feeling the weight of it settle just enough to stand. And in another part of the countryside, where the Lord's hall is still warm from last night's feast, the scraps are being gathered from the long tables, crusts, bones, the last drops of sour wine. For some, these leftovers will be a banquet. For others, a reminder of just how far the feast really is. Dawn is thin and colorless when the goats are driven in from the pen. Their breath smokes in the cold, curling up into the air and vanishing before it reaches the roof of the shed. The ground is stiff with frost, crunching under boots. The shed itself smells of straw, animal heat, and the faint, sour trace of yesterday's milk pail. Milking is done before the rest of the household wakes. The goats are restless but patient, shifting their weight as hands work quickly and gently. Milk hits the pail with a soft, rhythmic splash, steam rising from its surface in the cold air. The sound is steady, almost like rain on a shallow roof. When the pail is half full, a small shape appears in the doorway. A child, barefooted and wrapped in a wool shift too big for them. Without asking, they step forward, eyes fixed on the warm milk. A ladle is dipped in, and the liquid pours into a clay cup. It is thick, still frothy from the udder, carrying the faint scent of the animal and the grass it ate last. The first mouthful is a shock, not cold like milk from a cellar, but warm, almost the temperature of breath. It coats the tongue, heavy and slightly sweet, with a flavor that belongs entirely to the moment. By midday it will taste different, sharper, as it begins to sour. By tomorrow, if left untouched, it will have thickened and pulled away from the sides of the pail. But now, fresh and steaming, it feels like a gift. For the poor, this cup might be the richest thing tasted all week. There is no butter here, no cream, no cheese for the market. The milk is too precious, too little in quantity. It is drunk as it is, maybe shared between 2 or 3 mouths, each taking a slow turn with the cup. The warmth spreads quickly down the throat, reaching the stomach before the body has fully woken. In wealthier homes, milk is rarely drunk fresh. It is skimmed, churned, baked into custards, or blended with honey and spices for the Lord's table. Servants may carry trays of it to the bedchambers of noble children, cooling in silver jugs lined with cloth. The froth is whisked away, the animals sent mast. But here, nothing is hidden. The milk tastes of the goat, of the pasture, of the work of early hands. Once the pail is empty, the goats are led back out, their hooves clattering over the frozen ground. The shed grows quiet except for the drip of water from the roof as frost begins to melt. Inside the cottage, the milk is poured into smaller cups for those still waking. The child who drank first is licking the last traces from the rim, a thin white line across their upper lip. In summer, this ritual changes. The heat turns the milk quickly, giving it a tang that some like and others cannot stand. It is churned faster, turned to butter before the sun can spoil it. But in the cold months, the freshness lingers long enough to savor. The cup is set down empty, and the day begins, the fire stoked, the bread cut, the tools fetched for the fields. The memory of the milk's warmth stays a little longer than its taste, a reminder that even in lean seasons, there are moments that feel like plenty. And far to the north, beyond the fields and the frost, there are meals dug from beneath the frozen earth, roots as pale as bone, tasting of the ground itself. By the time you go looking for them, the snow is no longer clean. It lies in uneven heaps, pitted with dirt and streaked with thaw, the kind that crunches and then gives way beneath your boots. The wind is still sharp, but there is a heaviness in the air that hints at change, the slow, reluctant end of winter. You walk to the far edge of the field, where the soil is poorest and the ground dips just enough to hide what's left from the frost's first bite. The spade you carry is old, its handle polished smooth by hands that have been dead for years. The blade hits the crust of ice with a dull, frozen thud, and for a moment, it feels like the ground will win. But you press down with all your weight, the wood creaking under you, until the surface cracks. The smell that rises is deep and wet, a scent that has been locked away for months, the earth's breath, cold and stubborn. You kneel and dig with your hands now, pulling away the clumps until your fingers close on something solid and knotted. A root, no longer than your hand, pale where the frost has bitten it. The skin is thin, splitting in places, and the dirt clings as if it doesn't want to let go. It will not taste sweet. It will not taste like much at all, except for the memory of the soil it grew in and the long months it waited here, hidden under snow. You knock it gently against your boot, loosening the worst of the dirt, and drop it into the sack at your side. There are more, smaller ones, and you take them too. Every handful matters. For those with means, this is the season when the last of the stored grain is brought out, when barrels of salted meat are opened in the kitchens of stone houses. Stews are thick, bread is baked with white flour, and roots like these, shriveled, bitter, clinging to frost, are never seen on the table. But for the rest, they are not just food. They are the thin rope that ties the body to the coming spring. You find a patch where the ground is softer, and there the roots come easier, twisting out like the fingers of something buried too long. They fill the bottom of your sack until it is heavy enough to swing against your hip. The cold has worked its way into your gloves, your fingertips stiff and aching. Back at the cottage, the roots will be scrubbed in icy water, the dirt running off in thin brown threads. They will be boiled until the kitchen smells faintly of the field, the steam clouding the one small window. The texture will be soft but fibrous, catching between the teeth. A pinch of salt, if there is any left, will make them almost pleasant. When the meal is done, there will be no sense of feasting, only the slow, steady quiet of a hunger kept at bay for another day. And somewhere far from here, on a wide plain where the wind carries the scent of horse sweat and open fire, dough is already flattening under skilled hands, ready to meet the heat of a sun-warmed stone. The land here rolls out in every direction, endless and bare, broken only by the slow crawl of grazing herds and the dark smudge of a distant camp. The wind never stops. It combs through the grass, whispers over the backs of the horses, and lifts the edges of the felt tents until they flap like sails. In such a place, ovens are a luxury, and bread is made where the heat can be found, even if that heat comes from stone. The stone is flat, dark, and wide enough to hold a meal. All morning it has been sitting near the campfire, drawing in the sun's warmth, the surface almost too hot to touch. The dough is simple, flour ground from whatever grain could be traded for or harvested, a little water, and a pinch of salt if it could be spared. It is kneaded quickly, pressed flat between the palms and laid on the stone. The air smells of grass, smoke, and the faint tang of the dough as it begins to cook. The edges blister first, small bubbles swelling and darkening before they split. The bottom turns spotted brown, crisp where it touches the stone. There is no yeast here to make it rise, no butter to brush over it when it is done. This bread is made for travel, to be eaten while it is still warm, or folded and carried in a saddlebag until the next stop. You crouch beside the stone, waiting. The bread is turned with a stick, the surface now speckled with char. When it is lifted free, steam escapes in a soft breath, carrying the scent of grain into the wind. It is torn by hand, the pieces passed around. The first bite is hot enough to sting the lips, the texture both soft and brittle, crumbling if held too long. For a traveling herdsman, this is enough. Bread, a strip of dried meat, maybe a handful of curds, all eaten sitting cross-legged in the open air. For those in settled towns far to the west, flatbread might be served alongside stews thick with vegetables, the bread itself baked in clay ovens that hold their heat. Here, the stone and the fire are all that's needed. The crumbs fall quickly to the dust, carried away by the wind. Horses stamp nearby, their nostrils flaring at the smell. The bread is gone before it has time to cool, the stone already cooling in the shade as the camp begins to move. And in the towns beyond the next horizon, where the streets are narrow and the smoke hangs low, a single pot of pea soup will simmer for days, thinning with each meal until it is little more than warm water tinted green. By the time you arrive in this village, the air already carries the smell, faint, soft, and slightly sour, like wet cloth left near a fire. It seeps out from the narrow doorways and the gaps in the shutters, following you down the lane. Every house has its own pot, but they all hold the same thing: peas, water, and time. The pot on this hearth is squat and black, its lids slightly ask you to let the steam slip out in ribbons. Inside, the peas have already given up their shape. They are no longer whole, no longer firm, but a pale green mass that clings to the wooden spoon when it is stirred. A thin layer of oil from a scrap of fat shimmers across the surface, catching the light from the fire. This is not the soup of the first day, rich and thick, when the peas still taste fresh from the garden or the market. That day, you might add a few bones, maybe a pinch of herbs, and the bowls are full enough that the spoon stands upright if you leave it there. But this is midweek soup. Half the pot has been eaten already, and water has been added to keep it from running out. The taste is weaker now, more of the fire than the peas, and the color has faded to the pale green of a riverbank in spring. You ladle it into bowls, wooden, rough-edged, worn from years of use, and the steam warms your face. The first mouthful is still good, the peas clinging to the tongue with a hint of sweetness, but it's gone too soon. You sip slowly, trying to make the thin broth last, because you know by the week's end it will be little more than green water with a few skins floating on top. In richer homes, pea soup would be eaten in one night, perhaps with ham or thick slices of bread, the rest thrown out or given to servants. Here, nothing is thrown out. The pot is kept over a low fire day and night, a living thing that changes as the days pass. A handful of peas might be added if someone is lucky enough to find them. A bone dropped in from time to time will lend its taste to the whole. It is a meal that shapes the rhythm of the week. On the first day, people eat eagerly, bowls filled to the rim. By the third, they are careful, not wanting to take too much. By the fifth, the soup is more memory than food, and everyone is thinking about what might come next. The pot is never fully emptied. Even when it seems finished, a thin layer clings to the bottom, ready to feed the next batch. It is said that some pots carry the flavor of decades this way, each new soup taking on the ghosts of the ones before. Outside, the narrow street curves toward the harbor, where the wind smells of salt and wood tar. Along the dock, barrels are being rolled into place, brine sloshing inside. Soon, salted herring will be pulled from them, bright and wet, the kind of meal that makes the eyes water and the lips burn. The harbor is loud in a way the fields never are, gulls wheeling overhead, ropes groaning against wooden posts, the steady slap of waves against the dock. But louder still is the smell. It reaches you before the sight of the barrels does, sharp, oily, a salt-soaked tang that works its way into your throat. It's the scent of fish pulled from the water weeks ago and kept alive in memory by the brine. The barrels stand in neat rows, their staves swollen tight from the liquid inside. Some are open, revealing the silvery curve of herring packed head to tail, their bodies glistening like coins in the dim light. The brine is thick and cold, clinging to your fingers if you reach in. It is the kind of salt that burns the small cracks in your skin, a sting that lingers. You watch as a man pulls a fish free with practiced hands, its skin flashing in the sun. He doesn't rinse it. He doesn't need to. He tilts his head back and bites into it whole, teeth sinking into flesh that gives way with a faint, wet tear. The salt floods his mouth, strong enough to make his eyes narrow. He chews slowly, savoring the richness beneath the salt, the meat firm but slick. For a peasant far inland, herring like this would be a rare treat, traded for grain, cloth, or labor. A single fish could flavor a whole pot of porridge if chopped fine and boiled with it. But here at the coast, it is everyday fare. Fishermen eat it standing, leaning on posts, the juice running down their wrists. Children chew at the tails while their parents haggle over nets. Wealthier tables might see the same fish laid out beside white bread, fresh butter, and a jug of ale. It might be soaked first to draw out the salt, then served with herbs or pickled onions. For the poor, the salt is part of the meal, a preservative, yes, but also a reminder that food is meant to last, not just to please. When the barrel is nearly empty, the brine at the bottom is scooped into jars. It will be used to pickle vegetables or season soups through the winter, each drop carrying the ghost of the sea. Even the heads and spines are not wasted. They are boiled down for broth or fed to animals. The wind off the water is cold, but the smell clings warmly to your skin, to your clothes, to the air in your lungs. It will stay with you long after you leave the harbor, just as the taste will linger in your mouth. And if you turn inland, away from the salt and the gulls, the path will lead you toward the edge of the wood, where the damp earth hides small mushrooms, and hunger teaches you which ones you can eat. The forest begins where the last crooked fence falls away. Beyond it, the ground dips into shadow, the air cooler and wet, carrying the smell of moss and old leaves. The grass gives way to a soft carpet that sinks slightly underfoot. It's here, at the edge where the light still touches, that the mushrooms grow. You see them first as small, pale caps pushing through the leaf litter, some smooth as bone, others freckled with darker spots. Their stems are thin, their gills hidden until you crouch and lift one gently from the soil. The smell is earthy at first, almost pleasant, but breaks into something sharper, like damp cloth left too long in the rain. Hunger makes the hands bold. You know the old warnings. The way some mushrooms turn the lips numb, the way others kill before the next sunrise. But you also know the ones your mother picked, the ones her mother taught her to find, the faintly yellow caps that curl at the edges, the fat white stems that split cleanly, the small brown ones with a nut-like scent when cut. You gather them into a woven basket, brushing off the dirt, ignoring the faint chill that lingers in your fingertips. By the time you return to the cottage, the hearth is warm. A small pan sits ready, a lump of lard already melting in its center. The mushrooms hiss when they touch the hot fat, their edges curling, their scent rising with the smoke. It is not the scent of a feast, not rich or sweet, but it is sharp and alive, the kind of smell that makes the mouth water when the stomach is empty. You stir them with the tip of a wooden spoon, watching as they darken, shrink, and glisten. A pinch of salt, if you have it, is thrown in like a blessing. The lard bubbles around them, coating them in a sheen that clings to your fingers when you take one to taste. The outside is soft and oily, the inside dense, releasing a burst of flavor somewhere between soil and smoke. For the poorest families, mushrooms are a risk worth taking. They appear when other foods are scarce, after the last of the grain has been eaten and before the next crop is ready. In the manor's kitchen, the cook might use the same mushrooms in pies with cream and spices, each slice hidden under a layer of golden pastry. Here, they are eaten on their own, perhaps with a crust of bread if there is any left from the day before. You eat them slowly, each bite small, letting the fat coat your tongue. The taste clings to the back of your throat, the warmth spreading down into your stomach. It isn't filling, not truly, but it is something. The basket, now empty, sits by the door. Tomorrow you might go deeper into the wood, though the danger grows with each step away from the light. There are stories of men who never came back, of women found cold and still with baskets full beside them. But there are also stories of the rare, rich find, mushrooms big as a fist, worth enough to trade for a week's bread. As you scrape the last scraps from the pan, the smell of cooking still hangs in the air, mingling with the damp scent of the forest clinging to your clothes. Outside, the trees stand dark and silent, the ground beneath them hiding both poison and salvation. And not far beyond those trees, in a wooden chest wrapped in linen, lies something far rarer than any mushroom, a small jar of honey, kept for sickness, waiting for the day when sweetness is needed more than safety. The jar is small enough to fit in your palm, its glass cloudy, the lid sealed tight with wax that has darkened over the years. It lives not on the table, nor on any shelf within reach, but in a wooden chest beneath folded linen. This is not because it will spoil, honey does not spoil, but because it must be hidden from temptation. It is for sickness only, for the moment when a body is too weak to work, when the cough will not fade, when the fever makes the eyes glassy and unfocused. When that day comes, the chest is opened with quiet care. The lid peels back with a faint crack, and the smell blooms, warm, floral, and so heavy it seems to thicken the air. The honey inside glows even in dim light, a slow-moving gold that clings to the spoon like it knows its worth. The spoonful is small, barely a mouthful, but it feels larger the moment it touches the tongue. It coats every corner of the mouth, smooth and sweet with the faintest bite of wildflowers and sun. It slides down the throat slowly, leaving a warmth that is not from heat but from the memory of summer, the buzzing of bees over blossoms, the hum of the meadow. For a peasant, honey is not a sweet to be spread on bread or stirred into porridge. Those luxuries belong to the wealthy, who can buy whole combs from the beekeeper and serve them at feasts, letting the golden liquid drip over roast meats or cheese. Here, it is a remedy. A spoon for the sick child who will not eat. A spoon for the mother whose voice has gone raw from coughing. A spoon for the old man who can no longer rise from bed. There is an unspoken rule in the house: no one takes honey when they are well. To do so would be wasteful, like burning kindling on a summer day. It is not about greed, but survival, because once the jar is empty, there is no guarantee when it will be filled again. Bees are kept by some villagers, but they require time, skill, and luck. A single bad season of rain or frost can mean no harvest at all. And buying honey from the market costs more than most can spare, the coins better spent on grain or cloth. So the jar waits year after year, sometimes untouched for months, sometimes called upon 3 times in a single winter. It shrinks slowly, a finger's width at a time, until one day the bottom is visible. By then, spring might be close, or still far away. When the spoon is licked clean, the lips are sticky, and the sweetness lingers on the breath. It is a rare comfort, a brief pause in the long work of staying alive. But when the chest is closed and the jar returned to its place, The cottage air feels different, thinner somehow, as if the taste has reminded everyone how far they are from abundance. And beyond the cottage walls, in the fading light, the fields lie empty, the last roots buried in frozen earth, waiting for the hands that will come to dig them free. The fire has burned down to embers, a slow orange pulse that casts long, trembling shadows against the walls. The air in the cottage holds the day's cold inside it, softened only slightly by the heat from the hearth. A single pot sits on the low table. It is small, smaller than the hunger in the room, but it is all there is. Inside, the broth shimmers faintly in the dim light, thin enough that it ripples when the ladle stirs. What floats in it is not meat, not really, just a few strands of cabbage, the soft half-moons of a turnip boiled nearly to nothing, and tiny fragments of barley that slip between the teeth without resistance. The scent is faint, a ghost of flavor carried by steam that rises and disappears almost at once. Each bowl is filled slowly, the ladle dipping deeper until the bottom of the pot begins to scrape. The portions are measured by instinct, an evenness learned over years of sharing just enough to keep the belly from gnawing itself through the night. The bread is gone, finished yesterday, or perhaps the day before, and there will be no more until flour can be spared. They eat without talking. Not from anger, not from sorrow, but because there is nothing to say that will make the food more or the hunger less. The only sounds are the quiet clinks of wooden spoons against the sides of the bowls, the small sighs between swallows, the occasional shift of a chair leg against the floor. For those with more, the merchants, the lords, dinner is a thing of noise and weight. Meat carved from the bone, sauces rich enough to stain the fingers, laughter spilling across tables. For the poor, the richness is in the act itself, the gathering, the passing of the pot, the shared warmth of bodies close together in the stillness. The broth cools quickly, the steam fading into the air until it's gone. The bowls are drained, and the spoons placed inside them, handles leaning against the rims. The hunger is quieter now, but not gone. It never is. One by one, they rise from the table. The pot is rinsed with a splash of water, wiped clean with a cloth too thin to keep the damp from the hands. The embers in the hearth are covered with ash, to be coaxed back to life in the morning. Outside, the night has settled in completely. The wind moves against the walls, carrying with it the smell of the fields, empty now, but waiting. Tomorrow, there will be work to do, and perhaps something new in the pot by nightfall. Or perhaps not. For now, they lie down in the dark, the faint memory of warmth in their stomachs, and the knowledge that, even when the food is small, it is not eaten alone. And somewhere in that there is enough.